The doors of the sparring hall slammed shut before Clara Whitmore even finished walking through them, and the sound echoed like a verdict. Every head in the room turned toward her at once. Whispers rose immediately, sharp and cutting, the kind of whispers that were meant to be heard. "That's her, the transfer. The one from the Deathworld colony." Clara did not flinch. She kept her eyes forward and her shoulders steady, the same way she had walked into 100 unfamiliar rooms before this one. But this room was different. This was Ironvale Combat Academy, the most prestigious training school on the continent, and she had just been placed in the lowest tier that existed within its walls. Class 8. She had read the placement letter twice on the transport shuttle, certain there had been some mistake. There was no mistake. The academy staff had looked at her file, seen the word unclassified stamped where her combat rating should have been, and assumed the worst. They assumed she was untrained, fragile, a girl who had grown up somewhere harsh and had never held a weapon or thrown a proper strike in her life. They could not have been more wrong, but Clara said nothing. She had learned long ago that explanations rarely mattered until the moment demanded them. The instructor for Class 8, a tired-looking man named Coach Bennett Hale, called the room to order and gestured for Clara to take a seat at the back with the other low-ranked students. As she crossed the floor, a boy stuck his leg out just far enough to catch her ankle. She stepped over it without missing a stride, as if she had expected it, which she had. The boy's name was Derek Holloway, and Clara had heard about him before she ever set foot in the building. His father funded half of the academy's new training equipment, and Derek carried that fact around like a badge of honor. He was tall, confident, and used to being the strongest person in any room he walked into. He smirked as she passed him, clearly disappointed that she hadn't reacted. "Guess Deathworld girls don't talk much," he said, loud enough for the class to hear. A few students laughed. Clara sat down at the back row without a word, opened her notebook, and began writing down the day's lesson, exactly as if nothing had happened at all. She was used to being underestimated. On her home colony, underestimating someone could get you killed within a season. Here, the stakes were smaller, softer, wrapped in privilege and comfort. But old habits did not fade just because the danger looked different. She watched everyone in that room the way she had been taught to watch potential threats, noting who favored their left leg, who could not stop cracking their knuckles before speaking, who postured the loudest because they were the least sure of themselves. Derek fell into that last category immediately. At lunch, Clara sat alone at the end of a long table near the windows, eating slowly while the rest of the cafeteria buzzed with conversation that never seemed to include her. She didn't mind the silence. Silence gave her time to think, and there was a great deal to think about. The academy operated nothing like her home. Students trained here on schedules, with padded gear, inside rooms with soft lighting and climate control. Where she came from, training happened wherever the ground allowed it, and mistakes were remembered permanently, rather than corrected, with a gentle word from an instructor. A girl with short brown hair and an easy smile slid into the seat across from her without asking. "You're the new transfer, right, Clara?" Clara nodded once. "I'm Lily," the girl said. "Everyone's talking about you. Not exactly saying nice things, but talking about you." She said this cheerfully, as if it were an interesting fact rather than a warning. "Derek's telling people you got placed in Class 8 because you can barely stand up straight during a spar." "That's not surprising," Clara said. Her voice was quiet but even. People believe what they're told to believe. Lily studied her for a moment, tilting her head slightly. "You don't seem like someone who can't stand up straight." Clara allowed the faintest suggestion of a smile. "I never said I couldn't." Lily laughed, delighted by the answer, and from that point on, she made a habit of sitting beside Clara whenever she could. She was talkative in a way Clara wasn't used to, filling silences with commentary about instructors, gossip about students, and complaints about the cafeteria food. Clara found she didn't mind it. It had been a long time since anyone had simply wanted to sit near her without an agenda. The afternoon session was where things began to shift. Coach Bennett Hale gathered the Class 8 students around the edge of the sparring ring, a raised platform surrounded by a shimmering barrier of soft blue light. The barrier, he explained, was a safety ward, designed to soften impacts and prevent real harm during practice matches. It allowed students to spar competitively, without the risk that came from full-strength contact. Today we begin partner drills, he announced. Nothing serious. Footwork, balance, controlled contact. This is Class 8, remember. We build slowly here. Derek raised his hand immediately, his tone dripping with false politeness. Coach, can I request a partner? Bennett hesitated, clearly aware of where this was going, but the pressure of Derek's family name hung over every decision made in that hall. Who did you have in mind? Derek turned and looked directly at Clara. The new girl. Seems fair to welcome her properly. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the group. Bennett glanced at Clara, offering her the chance to decline. She could have. Nobody would have blamed her for choosing a gentler introduction to the Academy's training system. Instead, she stood up. That's fine, she said simply. Lily grabbed her sleeve as she passed. You don't have to do this. He's not exactly known for being gentle in the ring. I know, Clara said. It's fine. She stepped up onto the platform, and the safety ward shimmered faintly around its edges, humming with quiet energy. Derek rolled his shoulders and stretched his arms in an exaggerated show of confidence, clearly performing for the crowd gathering along the ring's border. Word had spread fast. Even students from other class levels wandered over to watch, curious about the new transfer everyone was talking about. Clara stood on her side of the ring, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose at her sides. She studied Derek's stance the way she studied everything, quietly, thoroughly, without giving away a single thought behind her calm expression. Try not to get hurt, Derek said, grinning at the small crowd rather than at her. I'll try, Clara replied evenly. Bennett called the start of the drill, reminding both students that this was meant to be light contact only, meant for practicing footwork rather than winning. Derek nodded along, but the moment the coach stepped back, his focus sharpened into something far more competitive than a simple drill required. He moved first, a quick forward step meant to test her reaction. Clara shifted her weight back just enough to let the motion pass harmlessly by, her feet adjusting with an economy of movement that seemed almost lazy, except that it placed her exactly where she needed to be. Derek frowned, clearly having expected more hesitation. He tried again, a little faster this time, a little less controlled. Clara sidestepped smoothly, letting his momentum carry him half a step past her, before she tapped his shoulder lightly, marking a clean touch under the drill's scoring rules. A few students along the ring's edge murmured in surprise. Derek's jaw tightened. He reset his stance, glancing briefly toward his friends at the ring's edge, aware now that people were actually watching the outcome, rather than the setup. Beginner's luck, he muttered. Maybe, Clara said, giving him nothing more. The drill continued for several more exchanges, and each time Derek pushed harder, testing the limits of what counted as light contact. Clara adjusted just enough to avoid real impact, while still marking clean touches of her own. She wasn't trying to embarrass him. She wasn't trying to prove anything at all. She was simply doing what she had been trained to do since she was old enough to walk, read an opponent's rhythm, and respond a fraction of a second before they expected her to. By the end of the drill, the score was clearly in her favor, though Bennett called it early, sensing the tension building faster than the safety of a gentle introduction drill was meant to allow. Derek stepped off the platform without a word, his easy confidence from earlier replaced by something tighter, more controlled, more dangerous. Clara stepped down as well, aware of the shift in the room around her. The whispers had changed tone. They were quieter now, more careful, filled with questions instead of mockery. Lily caught up to her as the class filed out for the day, practically vibrating with excitement. Did you see his face? He looked like someone told him the sky was a different color. Clara allowed a small, genuine smile this time. It was a drill, nothing more. Sure, Lily said, clearly unconvinced. Just a drill. That evening, in the quiet of her small dormitory room, Clara sat on the edge of her bed and unpacked the few belongings she had carried with her from home. A folded cloth, a worn strip of leather, once used to tie back her hair during real fights, the kind of fights that had nothing to do with drills, scores, or safety wards. She turned it over in her hands, feeling its familiar texture, thinking about how different this place was from everything she had known. She had not expected today to matter much. A single drill, against a boy who mistook confidence for skill, was hardly worth remembering. But she had felt something shift in the room as the drill ended. a subtle change in the way people looked at her. Curiosity, suspicion. In Derek's case, something closer to resentment. She placed the leather strip carefully in a drawer beside her bed, and did not think much more about it that night. She had no way of knowing yet that Derek Holloway did not simply let go of moments like this one. He carried them, turned them over, and waited for the right opportunity to settle the score, in a way far more serious than a supervised drill. Outside her window, the academy's lights flickered on across the courtyard, illuminating a place that looked peaceful on the surface. Clara had learned long ago that peaceful surfaces meant very little. She had survived a world where danger hid behind pleasant appearances far more often than it announced itself openly. She closed her eyes that night without any particular sense of dread, only a quiet, familiar readiness, the same readiness she carried with her everywhere she went. Whatever came next, she would be prepared for it. She simply did not yet know how soon next would arrive. The rumor moved through Ironvale Combat Academy faster than any official announcement ever could. By the following morning, students Clara had never spoken to were glancing at her in the hallways, some with curiosity, others with open suspicion. She ignored all of it, focusing instead on finding her way to her second class of the day, a theory lecture on combat strategy that she suspected would teach her very little she didn't already know from experience. Lily caught up with her outside the lecture hall, out of breath from jogging across the courtyard. "You need to hear this," she said, pulling Clara aside before they entered. "I was in the equipment room this morning, and I heard Derek talking to Owen and a couple of the others. They weren't happy about yesterday." "I didn't expect them to be," Clara said. "No, listen." Lily lowered her voice, glancing around to make sure no one else was close enough to hear. They weren't just annoyed. Derek kept saying something about making sure the next match wouldn't go the same way. Owen laughed and said something about the wards being adjustable if you knew the right technician. Clara went still for half a second, processing the words carefully. "Adjustable," she repeated. "That's what he said. I don't know exactly what it means, but it didn't sound good." Clara understood immediately what it likely meant, even if Lily did not. The safety wards surrounding the sparring rings were meant to soften impact during matches, calibrated by academy technicians to allow for competitive practice without real injury. If someone with the right access could adjust those calibrations, even slightly, it would change everything about what happened inside that ring. A blow that should have been absorbed harmlessly could instead land with the full force behind it. "Thank you for telling me," Clara said quietly. "What are you going to do?" Lily asked, worry creasing her forehead. Clara considered the question honestly before answering. "Nothing, for now. I don't have proof of anything, and accusing him without proof will only make things worse. I'll watch. I'll wait." Lily didn't look entirely satisfied with that answer, but she nodded anyway, trusting Clara's judgment, even though she barely knew her. The two of them entered the lecture hall together and took seats near the back, Clara's attention only partially on the instructor at the front of the room. The rest of her mind was elsewhere, turning over the pieces of information Lily had given her, searching for a pattern, the way she had been trained to search for patterns in far more dangerous situations than this one. Growing up on her home colony, Clara had learned that threats rarely announced themselves clearly. They arrived disguised as accidents, as coincidences, as unfortunate timing. The people who survived were the ones who noticed the small details before they became large problems. A tampered safety ward would be exactly the kind of thing designed to look like an accident afterward, an unfortunate malfunction rather than a deliberate act. She spent the rest of the day observing rather than reacting. During the midday break, she walked past the equipment room where the sparring gear and technical panels were stored, noting who came and went. She recognized Owen Bradley leaving the room with a maintenance technician, both of them laughing about something as they walked away. It proved nothing on its own, but it confirmed that Owen had been inside the room recently, exactly where Lily said the conversation about adjustable wards had taken place. That evening, after the last class ended, Clara returned to her dormitory room and sat quietly at her small desk, staring at nothing in particular, while she thought through her options. She could report her suspicions to Coach Bennett Hale, but without solid evidence, it would be her word against Derek's, and Derek's family carried far more weight within the academy's walls than a transfer student from an unclassified colony ever would. She could request to be excused from further sparring matches, citing safety concerns, but that would mean giving up the small ground she had gained the day before, retreating exactly the way Derek and his friends expected her to. Or she could prepare. She reached into the drawer beside her bed and took out the worn leather strip she had placed there the night before. It wasn't a weapon, it wasn't armor, it was simply a tool, one she had used countless times before, to keep her hair secured and out of her eyes, during moments when even a split second of distraction could mean the difference between walking away and not walking away at all. On her home colony, tying back her hair before a confrontation had become an unconscious ritual, a signal to herself that the moment for hesitation had passed. She hadn't needed that signal here, not until now. Over the following days, Clara noticed small changes in how the Class 8 students treated her. Some, inspired by her performance in the drill against Derek, began greeting her more warmly, asking quiet questions about her training background that she answered honestly but briefly. Others, loyal to Derek and uncomfortable with anything that threatened the usual social order of the academy, grew colder, whispering behind her back whenever she passed. Derek himself said very little to her directly during those days, which unsettled Lily far more than it unsettled Clara. "He's planning something," Lily said one afternoon as they walked together toward the dining hall. "I know him. When he goes quiet like this, it means he's waiting for the right moment." "I know," Clara said simply. "Doesn't that worry you?" Clara considered the question. "Worry doesn't help much where I come from. Preparation does." Lily glanced sideways at her, clearly wanting to ask more about what "where I come from" actually meant, but something in Clara's tone told her this wasn't the moment for that conversation. Instead, she simply nodded and let the subject drop, trusting that Clara would explain more when she was ready. 3 days after the initial drill, Coach Bennett Hale announced that Class 8 would hold an official sparring evaluation at the end of the week, a formal assessment meant to gauge each student's progress and determine potential advancement to higher class levels. The announcement sent a ripple of excitement and nervousness through the room, but for Clara, it meant something far more specific. An official match. Inside the ring, with the safety wards active. She caught Derek's expression the moment Bennett made the announcement, a flicker of something sharp and satisfied crossing his face before he schooled it back into casual indifference. He wanted this match. He had likely been waiting for exactly this kind of formal opportunity, one with an audience large enough to make any humiliation permanent and public. That night, Clara found herself unable to fully settle, her mind cycling through possibilities the way it always did, before a real confrontation. She left her dormitory and walked the quiet academy grounds under the pale evening sky, letting the cool air clear her thoughts. The campus, usually bustling with activity during the day, felt almost peaceful at night, the training halls dark and silent, the courtyard empty, except for the soft hum of security lighting. She found herself near the sparring hall entrance, without entirely intending to walk there. The building was locked for the night, but through the tall windows she could see the faint outline of the ring inside, its safety ward dormant and colorless, without active power running through it. A voice behind her broke the silence. "Can't sleep either?" Clara turned to find Lily approaching, wrapped in a jacket against the evening chill, holding 2 cups of something warm that steamed faintly in the cool air. "Something like that," Clara said, accepting the cup Lily offered her. They stood together near the sparring hall windows for a while without speaking, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Lily broke it. "You're really not scared of him, are you? Derek, I mean." Clara considered the question seriously before answering, the way she considered most things. "Fear isn't really the right word. Where I grew up, danger was constant. You didn't get to be afraid of every threat individually, because there were too many of them. You learned to assess, prepare, and respond. Fear becomes something you set aside because it doesn't help you survive." "That sounds exhausting," Lily said quietly. It was, Clara admitted, but it also meant that things like this, she gestured toward the dark sparring hall in front of them, don't feel as overwhelming as they might to someone else. I've faced worse than a boy with wounded pride and a family name. Lily studied her for a long moment, something like genuine respect settling into her expression. "I believe you," she said simply. They finished their drinks in comfortable silence before heading back toward the dormitories. the looming evaluation hanging unspoken between them. Clara knew, without needing to say it aloud, that whatever Derek and his friends were planning would likely happen during that formal match, when the eyes of instructors and students alike would be focused entirely on the ring, and any tampering with the safety wards could be dismissed afterward as unfortunate equipment failure rather than deliberate sabotage. She would need to be ready for exactly that outcome. Over the next 2 days, Clara trained quietly on her own during free periods, running through familiar movements in the corner of the academy's outdoor courtyard where few students bothered to look. She wasn't building new skills. She was simply reconnecting with instincts that had gone slightly dormant during her time adjusting to academy life. Balance, timing, the ability to read an opponent's weight shift before they committed to a strike. These were things she had known instinctively for years, but comfort and routine had a way of softening even the sharpest instincts if left unchallenged for too long. On the evening before the evaluation, Lily found her once more, this time in the academy library, surrounded by strategy texts she wasn't really reading. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Lily said, sitting down across from her, "I believe in you, and if something goes wrong with those wards, I'm not staying quiet about what I heard in that equipment room. I don't care what Derek's family name is worth around here." Clara looked up, genuinely touched by the offer. "Thank you, Lily. That means more than you probably realize." "Just don't get hurt," Lily said, only half joking. "I won't," Clara said, and for the first time since arriving at Ironvale Combat Academy, she felt something close to certainty settle over her, quiet and steady, the same certainty she used to feel back home whenever she knew a confrontation was coming, and had already prepared everything within her power to prepare. Tomorrow, the ring would be active. Tomorrow, Derek would get the audience he wanted. And tomorrow, Clara intended to be ready for whatever waited for her inside it. The morning of the evaluation arrived with a strange stillness hanging over the academy grounds. Clara woke before her alarm, staring at the ceiling of her dormitory room for several minutes before rising, her mind already sorting through everything she needed to remember before stepping into that ring later that afternoon. She dressed carefully in her training uniform, a simple fitted outfit designed for mobility rather than appearance, and reached into the drawer beside her bed for the worn leather strip she had carried with her since leaving home. She held it for a moment, feeling its familiar texture against her fingers, before setting it aside on her desk, ready for later. Not yet. The ritual meant something, and she intended to save it for the moment it truly mattered. Breakfast in the dining hall felt different that morning. Word of the evaluation had spread throughout the entire academy, not just Class 8, and dozens of students from higher tiers had apparently decided to attend as spectators, curious to see how the mysterious Deathworld transfer would perform under official conditions. Clara noticed the extra attention immediately, the way conversations quieted slightly when she walked past, the way eyes lingered a beat too long before looking away. Lily sat across from her, picking at her food without much appetite. "The whole school is talking about this," she said. "I heard some upper-tier students are skipping their own classes just to watch." "That's unfortunate," Clara said evenly, though privately she recognized what a larger audience meant. If Derek and his friends had truly tampered with the safety wards, a bigger crowd made the risk of exposure both greater and smaller at the same time. Greater, because more witnesses would see whatever happened. Smaller, because Derek would be more motivated than ever to make sure nothing traced back to him directly. The morning classes passed in a blur of forgettable lectures that Clara barely absorbed. By early afternoon, the entire Class 8 cohort gathered outside the main sparring hall, joined by a noticeably large crowd of onlookers filling the surrounding gallery seats above the ring. Coach Bennett Hale stood near the entrance, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the size of the audience for what was supposed to be a routine evaluation. He called the students inside, and the hall filled with the low murmur of dozens of conversations, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter from groups of upper-tier students who had come purely for entertainment. Clara took her seat among the Class 8 students, scanning the room methodically, noting exits, noting where academy staff were positioned, noting the technical control panel near the far wall, where the safety ward's calibration was managed. A technician she didn't recognize stood near that panel, adjusting something on a small handheld device. Clara watched him carefully, unable to tell from a distance whether his actions were routine maintenance or something else entirely. Bennett began calling matches according to a randomized order determined earlier that morning, working through several pairs of Class 8 students before finally reaching the match everyone in the room had clearly been waiting for: Clara Whitmore and Derek Holloway. The room's energy shifted immediately, murmurs rising into a low buzz of anticipation as both students made their way toward the ring. Derek moved with exaggerated confidence, playing to the crowd, occasionally flexing his shoulders as he passed familiar faces along the gallery seating. Clara walked with quiet, measured steps, her expression calm and unreadable. As she reached the edge of the platform, she paused, reached up, and gathered her hair back with steady hands, securing it with the leather strip she had carried from home. It was a small, almost unremarkable gesture, but something about the deliberate, practiced way she performed it caught the attention of several students seated closest to the ring. A few of them fell quiet, sensing something in that simple motion that felt entirely different from ordinary pre-match nerves. Lily, watching from the front row, felt a chill run through her, without fully understanding why. Bennett called both students to the center of the ring, reminding them of the evaluation's rules: controlled contact, clean strikes only, first to 5 clean points wins the match. Both students nodded their understanding, and Bennett stepped back, gesturing for the safety ward technician to confirm the barrier's activation. The shimmering blue light rose around the ring's edges, humming faintly with contained energy. To anyone watching, it looked exactly as it always did. Clara, however, noticed something subtle in the pitch of that hum, a slight irregularity, compared to the drill several days earlier. It was faint enough that she couldn't be certain, but every instinct she carried from years of reading danger, before it fully revealed itself, told her to trust the feeling. The ward had been altered. Bennett called the start of the match, and the hall fell into an expectant hush. Derek moved first, faster and more aggressive than he had been during their initial drill, clearly determined to establish dominance immediately in front of the largest audience of his academy career. Clara read the strike coming a fraction of a second before it arrived, and shifted her weight just enough to let it pass with minimal contact, though she felt, even through that glancing brush, a sharper edge of impact than the ward should have allowed for a controlled strike. Confirmation. The ward had definitely been weakened. She said nothing, gave no outward reaction that might alert Derek to what she now knew for certain. Instead, she adjusted her strategy immediately, recalibrating her approach the way she had been trained to recalibrate whenever new information about a threat presented itself. If the ward could no longer be trusted to absorb full impact safely, then her own precision needed to increase to compensate, minimizing the actual force behind every point-scoring strike, while still landing clean, technically valid touches. Derek pressed forward again, more confident now that his first strike had connected with more force than usual, clearly believing the tampered ward gave him an advantage he intended to exploit fully. Clara moved with him, redirecting his momentum with subtle shifts of her hips and shoulders, using his own aggression against him, rather than meeting it directly. She scored her first point cleanly, tapping his shoulder with barely more force than a light touch, careful to keep her own strikes far gentler than what the compromised ward might amplify. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some students clearly impressed by the exchange despite themselves. Derek's expression tightened. He reset, glanced briefly toward Owen and his other friends seated near the technical control panel, and pushed forward again with even greater intensity than before. This strike carried real weight behind it, clearly no longer restrained by whatever hesitation he might have felt about the evaluation's rules. Clara felt the compromised ward struggle to absorb the impact fully as she deflected the blow, a jarring sensation traveling up through her forearm, despite her careful positioning. She understood immediately that the situation had crossed a threshold. This was no longer simply a competitive evaluation between two students of differing skill levels. This was becoming something closer to what she had left behind on her home colony, a confrontation where real consequences waited behind every exchange, disguised beneath the Academy's polished veneer of controlled sparring. She could stop the match right there, call attention to the malfunctioning ward, and likely avoid further risk. But doing so without proof would only confirm Derek's version of events, painting her as someone unable to handle real competition, exactly the narrative he and his friends had been hoping to establish since her very first day at the Academy. Instead, she made a different choice. She would finish the match, but on her own terms, using precision rather than force, ensuring that whatever damage the compromised ward might inflict would come from Derek's own increasingly reckless strikes, rather than anything she did in return. The match continued, each exchange growing more intense, as the crowd's attention sharpened into rapt silence. Clara scored her second point, then her third, each one delivered with careful restraint, despite Derek's increasingly aggressive attempts to close the gap. Sweat beaded along his forehead now, frustration replacing his earlier confidence as he realized the skill gap between them was far wider than he had ever imagined possible. "Fight properly," he snapped between exchanges, his voice carrying an edge of genuine anger now, rather than performative confidence. Clara said nothing, conserving her energy and focus entirely on reading his next movement. Derek's fourth attempt came faster and more desperate than anything before it. A strike aimed with far more force than any evaluation match should have called for. Clara saw it coming clearly, recognized the shift in his stance a full half-second before he committed to the motion, and made her decision in that instant. She could allow the compromised ward to absorb whatever portion of the impact it still could, risking a harder hit than intended, or she could intervene directly, redirecting the strike entirely before it connected. She chose the second option, stepping inside his reach with practiced efficiency, catching his extended arm and redirecting its momentum harmlessly past her shoulder, while using the motion to secure her fourth point with a light, controlled tap to his side. Derek stumbled forward from the redirected momentum, catching himself awkwardly at the ring's edge. The crowd gasped audibly, several students rising from their seats to get a better view of what had just happened. Bennett, watching closely from the sidelines, frowned deeply, his attention sharpening on the ring's barrier rather than the students within it, clearly noticing something about the exchange that troubled him. Derek straightened, his face flushed with embarrassment and fury in equal measure. He turned toward her, and for a brief moment, Clara saw something in his expression that went beyond simple competitive frustration. It was the look of someone who had never truly faced a consequence for his actions before. Someone entirely unprepared for the possibility of genuine failure in front of an audience he had spent years cultivating. "One more point," Bennett called out, his voice carrying a note of tension that hadn't been there at the start of the match. Clara wins with the next clean strike. Derek's jaw clenched. He glanced once more toward Owen, near the control panel, and Clara caught the brief, almost imperceptible nod that passed between them. Something was about to change. The ward's hum shifted audibly, a subtle drop in pitch that told Clara instantly that someone had adjusted its calibration again, likely lowering it even further, in a desperate final attempt to ensure Derek's next strike would land with enough force to reverse the outcome of the match entirely, regardless of the rules governing controlled contact. She had perhaps a second and a half to decide how to respond. Derek lunged forward with everything he had, abandoning any pretense of controlled technique entirely, his strike aimed directly at her center mass with clear intent to end the match through overwhelming force rather than skill. The crowd's gasps turned into shouts of alarm, several students already rising from their seats, sensing that whatever was happening had moved far beyond the bounds of a normal evaluation match. Clara moved. Time seemed to slow the way it always did in moments that mattered most. Clara had lived through enough real danger to recognize this particular stillness, the strange clarity that arrived whenever a single decision would determine everything that followed. She did not think about the crowd, or the tampered ward, or the consequences waiting on either side of this exchange. She thought only about the movement in front of her, reading it with the same precision she had used to survive far greater threats than an angry, desperate boy determined to save face. She stepped to the side rather than back, closing the distance rather than retreating from it, a choice that went against every instinct Derek clearly expected her to follow. His strike, aimed at where she had been standing a heartbeat earlier, sailed past her shoulder with nothing behind it but empty air and his own overextended momentum. Before he could recover his balance, Clara redirected his arm downward and used the barest amount of controlled pressure to guide him past her, ending the motion with a light, precise tap against his back that registered clearly as her fifth and final point. The match ended in silence. For a long moment, nobody in the hall moved or spoke, the shock of what they had just witnessed settling over the crowd like a held breath. Derek stood frozen at the edge of the platform, breathing hard, his earlier confidence replaced entirely by stunned disbelief. Clara stood exactly where she had ended the exchange, calm and composed, her hands lowering naturally to her sides as the tension in the room began to shift into something else entirely. Then the ward flickered. It happened suddenly, a visible stutter in the shimmering blue barrier surrounding the ring, followed by a brief, sharp surge of light that crackled audibly along its edges, before stabilizing again into an unsteady, uneven glow. Several students in the front rows flinched back from the sudden display. Bennett's expression shifted instantly from confusion to alarm, and he moved quickly toward the technical control panel near the far wall. "Kill the ward," he ordered sharply. "Now." The technician near the panel fumbled with the controls, clearly caught off guard by the malfunction, while Owen and his friends near that same section of the gallery suddenly found urgent reasons to look anywhere except toward the panel itself. Clara noticed the exchange immediately, filing it away as further confirmation of exactly what she had already suspected. The barrier dropped a moment later, its shimmering blue light fading into nothing, leaving the ring exposed and quiet. Bennett crossed the platform quickly, checking first on Derek, who waved off his concern with obvious embarrassment, and then turning toward Clara. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine concern beneath its professional tone. "I'm fine," Clara said honestly. Bennett studied her for a long moment, clearly processing something in his own mind, before turning his attention back toward the malfunctioning control panel and the technician still fumbling with its settings. "That ward should not have behaved like that during a standard evaluation," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "I want a full diagnostic run immediately." Lily was already moving, pushing through the crowd toward the front of the gallery, with an urgency that caught Bennett's attention before she even reached him. "Coach Hale," she said, slightly out of breath, "I need to tell you something." Bennett turned toward her, his expression shifting into careful attentiveness. "Go ahead." Lily glanced briefly at Clara, who gave her the smallest nod of encouragement, before continuing. "A few days ago, I overheard Derek and Owen talking in the equipment room. They mentioned that the safety wards were adjustable, that they knew someone with the right access. I didn't understand what it meant at the time, but after what just happened, I think they were talking about exactly this." The hall fell into a tense, uneasy silence as Bennett's gaze shifted toward Owen, who had gone visibly pale near the gallery seating, and then toward Derek, still standing on the platform with an expression caught somewhere between defiance and dawning panic. "Is this true?" Bennett asked, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments earlier. "I don't know what she's talking about," Derek said quickly, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Bennett studied him for a long moment before turning toward the technician near the control panel. "Pull the maintenance logs for this ring. Every adjustment made over the past week. I want names, timestamps, everything." The technician nodded quickly and moved to comply, and the atmosphere in the hall shifted into something heavier, more serious than the excited buzz that had filled the room only minutes earlier. Students began murmuring among themselves again, but the tone had changed entirely. Curiosity replaced by something closer to concern and disbelief. Bennett called for an immediate pause to the remaining evaluation matches, instructing everyone to remain seated while Academy security was contacted. Word spread through the hall quickly that Headmaster Calloway himself had been notified and was on his way to the sparring hall personally, an unusual development that underscored just how seriously the situation was being treated. Clara stepped down from the platform quietly, aware of the many eyes still following her, though their expressions had shifted from curiosity or suspicion into something closer to genuine respect, mixed with uncertainty about what exactly they had just witnessed. Lily met her at the edge of the crowd, relief evident on her face. "I'm sorry," Lily said quietly. "I should have said something sooner, before the match even started." "You did exactly what you needed to do," Clara said gently. "The timing matters less than the truth coming out at all." They found seats near the edge of the gallery, while Academy staff worked to secure the sparring hall and gather information. Clara watched the proceedings with quiet attentiveness, noting how Owen was pulled aside for questioning first, his earlier confidence collapsing rapidly under the weight of direct scrutiny from Academy security staff. Whatever loyalty he felt toward Derek clearly did not extend to protecting him from serious consequences. Headmaster Calloway arrived within 20 minutes, a tall, composed woman whose reputation for fairness and thoroughness was well known throughout the Academy. She moved through the hall with quiet authority, speaking briefly with Bennett, before turning her attention toward the gathered students. "I understand there has been a serious incident involving tampered safety equipment," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hall, despite its measured volume. "This academy takes the safety of every student seriously, regardless of class ranking or family circumstance. A full investigation will begin immediately, and any student found responsible for compromising safety systems will face the strongest disciplinary measures available to this institution." Her gaze moved briefly across the room before settling, just for a moment, on Clara. Something in her expression suggested she had already heard more about the earlier match than most people in the room realized. "Miss Whitmore," she said, "I'd like a word with you, if you're willing." Clara rose without hesitation and followed the headmaster toward a quiet side room adjacent to the main hall, aware of the curious glances following her departure. Lily gave her an encouraging nod as she left, and Clara found herself grateful, not for the first time, that she had found at least one genuine ally within these unfamiliar walls. The side room was small and simply furnished, containing little more than a desk and a few chairs. Headmaster Calloway gestured for Clara to sit before taking a seat across from her, studying her with an expression that combined professional assessment with something closer to genuine curiosity. "I've reviewed your file," Calloway said without preamble. "Or rather, I've reviewed what little of it exists. Unclassified origin. No formal combat rating on record. Yet what I just witnessed in that ring suggests a level of skill and composure that far exceeds anything typically seen at your assigned class level." Clara said nothing immediately, uncertain how much honesty this conversation called for. "I'm not here to judge you," Calloway continued, seeming to sense her hesitation. "I'm here because I believe this academy made an error in its initial assessment of your abilities, and that error very nearly resulted in serious harm today, both from the compromised safety ward and from the assumptions that placed you in a position where such tampering could occur undetected in the first place." "I didn't ask for special treatment," Clara said quietly. "I only wanted to be evaluated fairly." "And you deserved exactly that from the beginning," Calloway said. "I intend to see that corrected, starting immediately." Clara studied the headmaster carefully, searching for any hint of insincerity in her words and finding none. "What happens to Derek and Owen? That depends entirely on what the investigation uncovers," Calloway said. "But I can promise you this. Deliberately compromising safety equipment to cause harm to another student is a serious violation of this academy's most fundamental rules, regardless of family name or financial contribution. If the evidence supports what your friend reported, there will be significant consequences." Clara nodded slowly, satisfied with the answer, even as she recognized that the full resolution of this situation remained uncertain. She had learned long ago not to expect perfect justice from any system, however well-intentioned its leadership might be. But Calloway's evident sincerity offered more reassurance than she had expected to find within these academy walls. "There's something else," Calloway said, shifting the conversation's direction. "Given what I witnessed today, I don't believe Class 8 remains an appropriate placement for you. I'd like to arrange a proper evaluation, one that accurately reflects your actual skill level, so we can place you where you truly belong within this institution." For the first time since arriving at Ironvale Combat Academy, Clara felt something unfamiliar settle over her, a quiet, cautious sense that perhaps this place might eventually become somewhere she could genuinely belong, rather than simply somewhere she needed to survive. "I'd appreciate that," she said honestly. Calloway offered a small, genuine smile. "Get some rest, Miss Whitmore. Tomorrow, we'll see exactly where you truly stand." Clara left the side room feeling lighter than she had in days, though the events of the afternoon still lingered heavily in her thoughts. She found Lily waiting outside, practically bouncing with impatience for details. "Well?" Lily asked immediately. "They're investigating everything properly," Clara said, "and it sounds like I might be leaving Class 8. Lily's face lit up with genuine excitement, quickly followed by mock disappointment. "That's great for you, but terrible for me. Who am I supposed to sit with at lunch now?" Clara allowed herself a real laugh, something rare enough that Lily's eyebrows rose in surprise. "I'm not disappearing," Clara said. "Wherever they place me, I imagine we'll still find lunch together." As they walked back across the academy courtyard together, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grounds. Clara found herself thinking not about Derek, or the compromised ward, or the uncertainty still hanging over the investigation's outcome, but about how strange it felt to imagine a future here that involved genuine belonging, rather than simple survival. It was a feeling she hadn't allowed herself in a very long time. The investigation moved faster than Clara expected. By the following morning, the entire academy seemed to already know the outcome before any official announcement had been made. Word traveling through the student body, the way it always did, in a place where privacy rarely lasted long. She heard the details in fragments throughout her morning classes, pieced together from whispered conversations and sideways glances directed her way. The maintenance logs had confirmed everything Lily reported. Records showed that Owen Bradley had accessed the Sparring ring's technical panel twice in the days leading up to the evaluation, each time using a maintenance override code that should never have been available to a student. Further investigation revealed that Owen had obtained the code from a junior technician who owed Derek's family a considerable favor, one that had apparently seemed harmless at the time it was granted, long before anyone imagined it might be used to compromise a student's safety during an official match. Clara learned the full details that afternoon when Headmaster Calloway called her back to her office, along with Coach Bennett Hale, to discuss both the conclusion of the investigation and the results of her own re-evaluation, which had taken place quietly that morning, under Calloway's personal supervision. She had expected the re-evaluation to feel similar to her earlier drill against Derek, a straightforward assessment of basic technique and footwork. Instead, Calloway had brought in 2 senior instructors from the Academy's Advanced Combat Division, both of whom tested her across a far wider range of skills than anything Class 8's curriculum had ever covered. Reaction speed, multiple opponent awareness, weapon-adjacent improvisation using standard training equipment. Clara moved through each test with the same quiet efficiency she had shown in her earlier matches, drawing increasingly impressed reactions from instructors who had initially approached the evaluation with clear skepticism. Now, sitting across from Calloway's desk once again, she waited to hear the results made official. "Let's begin with the investigation," Calloway said, folding her hands together on the desk in front of her. "The evidence against Owen Bradley is conclusive. He accessed the Sparring ring's safety systems without authorization on 2 separate occasions, adjusting the ward's calibration specifically to increase impact force during your match against Derek Holloway. He has been suspended, pending a formal disciplinary hearing, and depending on that outcome, expulsion remains a strong possibility." Clara absorbed this news calmly, having expected some version of this outcome already. "As for Derek," Calloway continued, "the evidence suggests he was aware of the plan and encouraged it, though he did not personally access the technical systems himself. He has been placed on probation, stripped of several academy privileges, and will be required to complete a formal apology and safety review process before returning to normal class participation. His family has been informed, and I can assure you that his financial contributions to this institution carried no weight whatsoever in how this matter was handled." "Thank you for that," Clara said sincerely. "I appreciate knowing the process was fair." "It should always be fair," Calloway said simply. "That's not a courtesy extended to you specifically. It's how this institution is meant to operate, even when it occasionally fails to live up to that standard." Bennett, who had remained quiet throughout most of the conversation, finally spoke, addressing Clara directly. "I owe you an apology as well," he said. "I should have recognized the tension building between you and Derek far earlier than I did, and I certainly should have questioned that ward's behavior the moment it started acting strangely. I let my focus on managing a difficult class distract me from properly protecting a student under my supervision." "You didn't know what was happening," Clara said. "None of us had proof until it was almost too late." "That doesn't excuse the oversight," Bennett said. "But I'm grateful it didn't end worse than it did." Calloway shifted the conversation toward its final and, for Clara, most significant point. "Regarding your class placement," she said, "the results from this morning's evaluation were unambiguous. Both senior instructors independently rated your combat readiness well above standard advanced tier benchmarks. Given your unique background and the level of skill you've demonstrated, I'm recommending an immediate transfer into the Academy's Advanced Combat track, effective starting tomorrow morning." Clara felt a quiet swell of satisfaction at hearing the news made official, though she kept her outward reaction measured. unwilling to let herself fully celebrate until the reality of the change had settled properly. "I appreciate that," she said. "Truly." "You've earned it," Calloway said. "I only regret that it took an incident like this one to correct an oversight that should never have happened in the first place. Going forward, I intend to review how this institution handles placement for students with unconventional backgrounds. Your file's simple, unclassified designation clearly failed to capture what you're actually capable of, and I suspect you're not the only student who has slipped through a gap like that." Clara left the office that afternoon carrying a mixture of relief and quiet pride, feelings she hadn't allowed herself to fully experience since arriving at the academy weeks earlier. She found Lily waiting for her outside, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "Well?" Lily demanded immediately. "Tell me everything." Clara allowed a small smile to spread across her face, genuine and unguarded. Advanced Combat Track, starting tomorrow. Lily let out an excited shout, drawing curious glances from nearby students before throwing her arms around Clara in an enthusiastic hug. "I knew it! I absolutely knew it! From the moment you tied that ring around your wrist during the drill and didn't even flinch when Derek came at you." "It was my hair, not my wrist," Clara said, laughing despite herself. "Details," Lily said, waving the correction away cheerfully. "The point is, everyone's going to know your name now, for the right reasons, instead of the wrong ones." They walked together across the courtyard as the late afternoon light spread gently across the academy grounds, the atmosphere around them entirely different from the tense, whisper-filled days that had followed Clara's arrival. Students who passed them now offered genuine nods of acknowledgement rather than suspicious glances, word of the investigation's outcome having thoroughly reshaped the narrative surrounding the mysterious Deathworld transfer. That evening, back in her dormitory room for what she now knew would be one of her final nights among the Class 8 residents, Clara sat quietly at her desk, looking at the small collection of belongings she had carried with her from home: the folded cloth, the worn leather strip resting beside it, the same one she had used to tie back her hair before her match against Derek. She thought about everything that had happened since stepping through the academy's gates, the assumptions made about her before anyone had bothered to truly see her, the quiet, careful patience required to let the truth reveal itself naturally, rather than forcing a confrontation before she was ready. The unexpected friendship with Lily, offered without hesitation or agenda, exactly when she needed it most. She thought too about home, about the world she had left behind, where danger was constant and comfort was rare, where every skill she carried had been earned through necessity rather than choice. She hadn't expected to find anything resembling genuine belonging here, in a place so different from everything she had known. Yet somehow, despite every obstacle placed deliberately in her path, she had found exactly that. The following morning, Clara packed her few belongings and made her way toward the Advanced Combat Training Hall, a building she had only seen from a distance during her time in Class 8. The hall itself felt different immediately upon entering, larger and more purposeful, filled with students whose confidence came not from family names or financial influence but from genuine, demonstrated skill. A tall instructor with sharp eyes and an assessing expression greeted her at the entrance. "Clara Whitmore," he said, checking a small data pad in his hand. "Welcome to Advanced Combat Training. I've reviewed the notes from your evaluation. I'm told you handled a compromised safety ward with remarkable composure." "I did what was necessary," Clara said simply. The instructor studied her for a moment longer, before gesturing toward the training floor. "Let's see what else you're capable of then." Clara stepped forward without hesitation, reaching up as she walked to secure her hair back with the familiar leather strip, the gesture no longer carrying the weight of uncertainty or danger it once had. Here, in this new space, it simply meant readiness, the same quiet confidence that had carried her through every challenge since arriving at Ironvale Combat Academy. Behind her, the classroom she was leaving faded into memory, along with the assumptions and misunderstandings that had defined her earliest days within these walls. Ahead of her stood an entirely new set of challenges, ones she intended to meet with the same steady determination that had carried her this far. Whatever came next, Clara Whitmore was finally exactly where she belonged,